Okay, everybody, welcome before turn. So if this is your first time, we welcome you. I'm Janelle, the event coordinator for the store here. And this is something that's very important to us. When we started our business, we came up with what's called vision, and values. And that's the purpose of these talks. It's to connect people to nature. That's our mission. Our vision is to serve, educate, and create experiences and our values as a team is we fly together. So all the people who attend, the seminar tonight are very valued in this organization and have done a lot of work with them since just together. So once again, welcome. Green is native bees, or native bees. Sorry about that. And Jody Green, entomologist from Nebraska Extension Educator, to be here. Afterwards, I just wanted to point out your attention. You're probably like, what are all these plants? We can examine or sell of what bees pollinate and listen happen. These are after the presentation. Everything here. These are from Prairie Legacy. They're a local family owned Western Nebraska. That's not Western Nebraska. There's actually a town called Western Nebraska, just southwest of Lincoln, because they drove us an hour and a half to get these here to us. So anyway, they're family owned, and they share plants concern for a natural habitat to restore and sustain native plant communities and induce pollination. So we thought this would go along great with tonight's subject. To support this goal in this presentation, they have selected 23 species of native plants for purchase tonight. We also have, let me see, they're right here in front of me, back behind me, we have seed kits, and these are for like prairies. This is called native Nomo bee lawn, also to go with tonight. We've got backyard buffet bird wildflower mix. And then this one is called a pollinator, I can't read that. Anyway, it's a pollinator prize. That's what that is. But these and individual packets are for sale tonight afterwards too as well. And this is a planting medium that you need to grab with your packet. This is called rhizoles. It just mixes together with your seed to help you plant them. And there's all complete instructions on all of this back there, and just be mindful of the directions because some seeds plant now, some seeds wait till winter. So anyway, with that said, what's in front of me too tonight is a live bird sanctuary. This is also for sale. You can see what all the species are inside, as well as we've got signs up there what the species are. We can buy a whole one or a half one tonight. If it sells out, we can order you one. And finally, before our presentation, this company, Prairie Legacy, will be in our parking lot every Saturday in a tent outside from 10 to 4, selling plants and answering your questions about pollination and things like that. So anyway, I will be available afterwards to discuss this at one of the tables and help select the plants or answer any questions we have. And then after Jody's talk, and you get to answer her some questions and answer from her, Cricket will tell you about tonight's promotion. So I would like to introduce Jody Green.
Am I on? Okay. Or do I have to press a button? Oh, this button? Okay. Hello? Oh, hi. Thanks for having me. So my name's Jody Green. I work down the street. You would think I would have been here earlier, but I work until the last minute. I always say I'm 20 minutes early or 10 minutes late. Because if I have 20 minutes, I'm like, oh, there's so much I can do in that time. And then I'm late. But anyway, I'm the entomologist down there. I work with a lot of horticulturists. So we've got people that know about plants. So if you have plant questions or you need a plant speaker, we've got some really good educators and assistants over there. We also just deal with anybody in Douglas and Sarpy County that have a question about food, 4-H, STEM, anything like that. So what Extension does is we are the arm of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln that reaches out and educates the public. So there are people doing research at UNL, and we take that to the people to make it applicable. I do have to say that I am talking about native bees today, but my specialty are usually going to be the things that people hate the most, which are the bugs that bug you. So it's kind of a treat to be able to talk about the pretty things. And so this is more like of a hobby of mine. So in my free time, which I don't get a lot of, it's all about bees and uh, just creatures and things like that. So my specialty is bed bugs, roaches, termites, and ants, though. So if you do have a question about that, that's my specialty. So there are a lot of bee experts, and we'll talk about that. But this is something I've learned just growing a garden and getting outside. So that's what I encourage you all to do. And since you're all associated with the store, and I've bought birdseed here too, that you know love the outdoors and that you appreciate what nature has to offer. So I think I'm speaking to a really good audience already. So you're here to talk to listen about these beneficial insects that are pollinators. And sometimes I have to tell people because they don't want to hear about bugs. I just taught 496 sixth, seventh, and eighth graders about careers in entomology, and there is like 0.01% of students that were interested in bugs. So that's a little bit different of a crowd, but you know sometimes I have to tell them there are a million described species of insects, and so there's a big diversity of them. They are all different. You can't hate them all. And so far, I've not known anyone to hate any lightning bugs. So that's nice. And over the years, people are more accepting to bees. But you know, they look different, all different kinds of insects. They have different form, different function, colors. They're just they're just fantastic. There are some that are not so great, but we still have to kind of appreciate them for some of the fantastic things they can do, which are gross sometimes too. But you know, today we're going to talk about pollinators, and it's one of the beneficial things of insects. But you know, they also play a role in decomposition of like plants, trees, bodies, roadkill, those kind of things. And they're also, you know, really good biocontrol agents. So there are a lot of insects that take care of the pest bugs that we don't like. We've got so many parasitoid wasps, beetles, kind of things that will take care of the bugs in your house. They're called spiders, and people don't like those either. But a lot of times I'll just say that's free pest control. And if it's something that you can manage or deal with, you know, put those outside where you don't want those insects, or we have to do something called IPM, integrated pest management, to keep the ones we don't want away. They're also a really big part of the food web, and if we didn't have insects, we would have and if you are into feeding birds, we know that birds eat a lot of caterpillars. And if I think you guys will probably be fans of Doug Tallamy, and he talks about the oak, and the oak, you know, with all the caterpillars there, and it's to feed the birds and all the life that we have out in nature. And then, you know, when we talk about bees, sometimes we think about the honeybee and the products that and the food and honey and the wax that we get from them. But pollination is essential. We need that. We need those pollen grains to go from the male flower to go to the female part of the flower, so we can have seeds and more flowers and make the world more beautiful. And you'll probably hear all those stats all the time. 1 in 3 bites of food comes from a pollinating animal, and you know 75% of flowers are pollinated by an insect. Lots of money is, you know, the pollination services by bees and other insects and animals are, you know, estimated at, you know, 57 billion, I believe it's there. Even honeybees, you know, when we'll talk about that for a little bit, they are estimated at like $19 billion industry of having those as pollinators moving around. Globally, we need them as well. But we're talking about bees today because bees are the most effective pollinators. So that means that they move around the most pollen, and that's because of their life. That's what they do. They feed their larvae pollen, and so when they go to the flowers, they are touching the pollen and they move it around. So there are other things that we see on flowers, but they're not necessarily moving that pollen on purpose, whereas bees kind of do that. So there are many different types of bees, which you'll see in this presentation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between bees and flies and also bees and wasps, because we often get them mixed up or misidentified because a lot of them are mimics. So they look like a bee because if they've got those bright colors, then nobody wants to mess with them because they don't want to get stung. And I mean, they do a good job. We see anything that's bright colored, we want to kind of stay away from it. If we see something that's bright red, usually means it doesn't taste good. And so things won't want to prey on that. But bees have specialized hair called scopa, and those are the pollen collecting hairs. And then some of them have pollen, I guess, I don't know, I call them saddlebags or pollen pants if they're on their legs, but it's the corbicula. It's where they store that pollen to get it back to their nest. And they feed their larvae pollen. So baby bees don't look like bees at all, and we'll see a little picture of that. But bees and flies, and we've got a lot of flies. They're the second best pollinators. A lot of times we think of flies and we think of like dead things or smelly things or fruit flies, and we don't really like those too much. But we can see a lot of these drone flies. They look very similar to bees. And we call a lot of these syrphid flies or flower flies or hover flies. But the main difference between a bee and a fly is that a fly will have only 2 wings. So just one pair of wings. Those second pair of wings, they've adapted these things called halteres. And so they're just like little balancing knobs. You may see those on like a crane fly where it's probably most evident, but that's what flies have. And they also have giant eyes. So their compound eyes of a fly pretty much take up their whole head. And if you look at a fly and the eyes touch right in the middle, that's usually a male. And the females will have more of like little fluff, or they'll have a space between those compound eyes. And usually we'll see them. Here's a bunch of different flies. They may perform different roles as larvae, or sometimes we call those maggots. But as adults, they're also feeding on nectar and maybe feeding on pollen as well. And so in that process, they will pollinate plants. And most times it's not really a big deal. But I do say there are some times when you want to make sure you're getting the right thing, and it comes with tattoos. If you want a bee tattoo, you want to make sure it's got the right number of wings, because you don't want a fly tattoo. And this was a story of a bunch of tattoos that turned out to be flies. So, maybe you wouldn't notice, but this is when it's important. But most times, I don't mind for art's sake and things like that. But so then we have also got wasps. And I hear all the time, especially this time of year, it was a lot of wasps out last weekend because it was warm. And so they were coming out of their hibernation, the fertilized females, and then they're going to start starting their nests. So like paper wasps or yellow jackets. Am I messing something up? Okay, whatever. I'll just keep going. But bees are going to be more hairy generally, and there's always exceptions to the rule. And wasps are usually going to be longer, kind of more, they look more sleek. And so when I'm thinking about, the difference between like a paper wasp or like a honeybee, they've got those. That's okay.
Thanks for your patience.
Sometimes we say that bees are like vegetarians because they are feeding their larvae pollen, whereas wasps, they're feeding their larvae like kind of sushied up caterpillars. So they need that meat, they need that protein. But you may see the adult wasp feed on nectar of flowers and plants. So you'll see a lot of the paper wasps, and sometimes even the yellow jackets will feed on there. And you'll see some of those solitary bees or wasps feeding on nectar as well. And here's some pictures of that. I don't know how well you can see it with the glare, but sometimes they're going to feed on rotten fruit. But they're not the best pollinators, but sometimes they do transfer pollen. You'll be able to see it on their bodies, just not intentionally. But a lot of the solitary wasps can pollinate plants. And then this is a poster I have in my office. If you're ever on Zoom with me, you'll see probably a lot of weird things, but you'll see this poster. You'll see Michaela's back there. She's our front receptionist, she knows that. She's nodding. Nobody wants to come in my office because it's scary. But this poster is there. It pretty much it says there are 4,000 bees in North America, and that's something people don't know. They think honeybee, bumblebee. We've got so many bees. We just got to go out there and look for them, or just observe. It's one of those things where if you start looking, you find it. And when you find it, you will love them. So when anyone asks me, and I probably know lots of insects that could be my favorite, I still really love the leafcutter bee is my favorite. It's so cute. But it's in one of those. So 4,000 bees in North America. But yes, we usually think about the honeybee and the bumblebee. And these are our social bees. So, they're like us. They've got families. They've got a nest. And if you go and try to hurt one of their family members, they will sting you. And honeybees can only sting one time because they have that barbed stingers, but bumblebees can sting repeatedly. And, a lot of times these creatures don't want to sting you, but they're there to defend. So you think about protecting your nest in your house, someone comes in, invades, hurts, threatens anyone in your family, you will fight, right? I think about it that way. So, sometimes we don't do it on purpose, but, when you're mowing the lawn later in the season and there's a bee nest somewhere, a bumblebee nest, it could be a very painful situation. So, keep your eyes open. But that social bees, of all of the social bees, only 10% of those are social. So that's 90% are solitary bees. Some of them you'll learn about today. I do want to say, if you are at all interested in honeybees, we have a professor down at UNL. She runs the UNL Bee Lab. She's fantastic. Her name is Judy. I'm Jody. We get mixed up all the time, but she is the honeybee expert. She puts on a lot of classes, Great Plains beekeeping classes. So if you need or keep bees, contact her. Their website's great. She's got students. They do a lot of events. She's amazing. And then if you also want to join a club, there's a Nebraska Bee Club. Where's your bee? Oh, in the Bohemian Cemetery, right? Are you there? No? There's an apiary here in the Bohemian Cemetery. I've not been there, but I heard it's really fantastic. So yeah, our master gardeners have several like teaching gardens, and that is one that they do have hives. And I know with the UNLB club, they are looking for places to put hives. So even if you're slightly interested, you could always reach out. But honeybees, that's not my thing because she's so good at it. And it's a lot of work. Like these honeybees are managed livestock. So that's also what I want to mention, and that they're not native. So I don't even know why I'm talking about them other than that they're bees. But these are also different, that they are perennial colonies, right? We're trying to keep them alive through the winter. They are livestock. We take care of them. They have diseases. We spend a lot of money, trying to figure out what's going on with the honeybees. And when they talked a long time about colony collapse and all that, that really had to do with the honeybee colonies. But there's clubs and places that you can learn all about that. So again, non-native. And saying that they're perennial means we want them to last through the winter. There is often a lot of death through the winter. And sometimes you will see swarms. And if you have a swarm, we tell people to call a beekeeper to take that away. We don't want anyone to spray those bees or contaminate honey or anything like that. But when they're swarming like this, they're pretty much harmless because they don't have a nest. They're looking for one. So they don't have a hive, they don't have a nest, so they're not defensive at all. I've only got to see a swarm one time. It was really cool. And someone came and got it. It was pretty neat. Bumblebees are our other social bee, and these are native. And we have 20 different species of bumblebees here in Nebraska, so that's pretty cool. They're kind of hard to identify when they're flying around unless you see them, with their wings spread, but there are a lot of them, and I can go through that in a little bit. But this is what it looks like inside their nest. Very different than a honeybee, right? Not as organized. A bunch of random, disorganized honey pots with some honey in there, and they don't need a lot of them because they don't have to last through the winter. They are an annual colony like all other bees. So the female starts off in the like they're coming out right now. I have a competition with a master gardener, Charlie. It's whoever sees the first bumblebee, he won. And but the bumblebees start flying around, like in this video here, really early because she's come out of hibernation, fertilized female. She's looking for a place to make that nest. It's often going to be an abandoned rodent burrow or something underground. Sometimes it's in compost piles, things like that. But she starts off really small, makes those little pots, and the first brood comes out, and they're all female. This is what happens. And they start foraging for her, and then that colony grows. And depending on what species is, we'll determine how big they are. But so early in the season, there's just one queen right now. So if you see a really big bumblebee, that's what she's doing. She's looking for a nest. Later on in the summer, she's in the nest just laying eggs, and the rest of her foragers are taking care of the brood and going out and foraging. So again, they're going to be in those little abandoned rodent burrows, underground, under sheds. They kind of get into the places we don't necessarily want them. If you do, there are sometimes, I don't know if they have them here, but they'll have these things called domiciles or bumblebee boxes you can put out. But sometimes you put things out and they're not going to nest in it. They like to nest where maybe you don't want them, right? But later on in the season is when they can become a sting hazard if you're going to mow over them. I have been known to save bumblebees when I can. This was a bumblebee nest that I saved and put in my own backyard because it was in a feral, one was in a feral cat box downtown and another one was in someone's sprinkler box. And so if I could go and take it at night and put it into a box, then I will. I only got stung once, and that was painful, but we were good, and I just had a small backyard. But bumblebees, they'll forage on a wide range of flowers. This is one of the coolest things at the extension office. So if you can come by in the summer and see the hot lips turtlehead, the bumblebees go in and out. I can watch that all day, but they're big enough and strong enough to get in there and get that pollen and go from flower to flower. So it is pretty neat. They've got their scopa or pollen collecting hairs on their hind legs, and you'll see that the different color of pollen that they'll carry around with them. Here is, I'll put some resources at the end too, but this is a bumblebee watch, and you can go to this website and you can see what state you're in, and it will tell you what kind of bumblebees are there. And so when they ask, you can see the guides on how to identify them, and it's usually like looking at the different parts of their body and the different colors, like yellow or black or things like that. So I put, the ones that I have seen and the ones I've been able to identify from some of my pictures. And if any of you love taking pictures of bugs like I do, I would recommend iNaturalist. It's a free app for putting that on there, recording it. It'll map it for you, and people will be able to tell you actually what kind of insects they are. It's okay. So that's what it looks like. We do have this American bumblebee that is pretty rare. You're not often, seeing. And these three I have not seen so far, but it says that they're here in Nebraska. So, it would be really cool if you got to see that. And they didn't even have some of the pictures there. They're kind of waiting. But you can see that, in some places they're common, in some places, they're in decline. And anytime you post to iNaturalist, a lot of scientists are taking that data and they're trying to find out what's around. So you are actually contributing to science and what we do know about the insects in our environment. So if 10% are social bees, then 90% are solitary bees, and so we'll talk about those. 30% of those solitary bees nest in cavities. That means 70% nest underground. And that was something that blew me away because we don't see them. There are things underground happening below our feet and in the dirt that is just amazing. So what we're talking about is a solitary bee is one female that's taking care of her brood. So she doesn't have anyone to help. She's doing all the work. So she's making or finding the burrows or those cavities and collecting pollen, putting that in part of that arm, or think of it as like another little apartment. She's putting that in one of those chambers. and then laying in an egg. And then that larvae will emerge, start eating that pollen. She doesn't live to see her offspring, but she has provisioned that nest for those larvae. And so she's got them in different parts, and then the next year, or depending on what species it is, it will emerge and start doing the same thing. And some of them will overwinter underground. So, probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll have someone calling the extension office saying that they have ground bees and they want to spray, and I'll have to explain this all to them. But we've got 70% of those that live underground. So that's what they do. And for the cavity nesters, sometimes it can be something like artificial nests, like something like this that I've brought, like little cavities or tunnels. Other times, it can be underground that they're making a tunnel. And so the idea there is, and I'm sure you've seen these bee houses, is that it's like a tunnel like this, and these are all different cells, but this tunnel is done by one female. So this is her brood, and she has the ability to determine the sex of her offspring. So she puts the females at the back because they need to be protected, and she puts the males up front because they get predated on, and sometimes parasites get to them. But each one of these will develop into to a new bee. So that's how that works. But she is also provisioning with pollen. So again, each nest is maintained by a single female. That's why they're called solitary bees. And you'll be able to see sometimes like these holes in the ground. Those could be ground nesting bees, and you may see your neighbor or your friend that's got this giant bee hotel, and it's just a kind of like a birdhouse or a box that has a bunch of tubes. And so this is also, just a short season in some cases, but it's an annual thing. They're not going to live through the winter. We've got sweat bees. So if anyone's ever seen on their flowers, those really green metallic bees, and sometimes their abdomens have stripes, they're the bicolored ones. They live in the ground. So sometimes you may see these little holes. I do not recommend sticking your finger in any hole that may be in the ground, because you may see burrowing spiders, you may see ants. There are a lot of different things. This is why when they ask me on Backyard Farmer what lives in this hole, I don't know. You're there, go check it out. So this was really cool. This was in a vegetable garden, but if you stood there long enough, you could see in and out this little green, metallic bee coming in and out. So what she's doing is getting pollen and putting those in those chambers. We also have mining bees. They look very similar to bumblebees. They're fluffy and they're cute. And I leave a tiny little bed in my raised bed that's just, it doesn't have mulch on it. And one day I saw, I don't know, well, this what? Oh, yeah, this little bee came out of this little place. And then I don't want to move anything because I know that it's probably using that stick as a landmark. And so it was nesting under there. But we've also got these longhorn bees. So they've got really long antennae. The female of the two-spotted longhorn bee looks completely black, but on her abdomen, she'll have two little yellow spots over there. This is probably one of the cutest things ever. So those are male longhorn bees. If you have any grasses out in your garden at night, the males gather and they have what we call bachelor parties. They just hang out together. They grab onto the blades of grass and they just sleep because they're not doing any work. They're having fun. Each female is back in her nest, taking care of her brood, and they're out, sleeping. But if you get out in the morning and you can check them out on the grass, it's just so cute. And then we've got, specialized bees that are just very hairy. Some of them are like sunflower bees, squash bees, different things like that. But those longhorn bees are really cute and kind of chunky and cute. So these cavity nesters, what the difference is between them is what they're using for nesting material and what they're using, what plants, and then so like that material and where they're building it. So a lot of these like artificial nests or places that they can't excavate that nest themselves. You'll see a leafcutter bee uses leaves, a mason bee uses mud, and then we've got these two bees here. Maybe not these ones specifically. There are different resin bees, but they will use resin. So what they're using it to make the different cells is different material that they're collecting out in nature. And so you can see when they're out there collecting these things, that is a time that they can be exposed to pesticides if it's in the leaves or if it's in the mud, right? Or so that's one of the things we need to look out for. And then we've also have carder bees or this wool carder bee that uses the trichomes or the fuzzy parts of some kinds of plants for their nest. So these cavities, you can see a lot of them. If you don't want to do something artificial, there are things out in nature called pithy stems that you can use. And I've actually over time been using those because they're just easier to use, and then they'll break down over time and I don't have to clean them because we do have to maintain our bee hotels, which takes time, right? Because after a while, if we start managing those bees at home, it's kind of like honeybee colonies in the fact that we have so many bees in such a small area, so it opens it up to disease and parasites and things like that. But these hollow stems are where they're going to develop, and then whenever they're ready, they will emerge and start all over again. So mason bees, it is mason bee time right now. So a lot of times we think of mason bees as like early bees. And I know my colleague Scott Evans, he just had one of these and he had it under his deck. And last week he said he saw mason bees going in them. So if you're ready and you've got flowers and you've got somewhere for them to nest or stems in the ground, the mason bees are out there. We've got some metallic like orchard bees, and we also have some of these fuzzy ones too. But this was very early. I'm just standing there and I can just see these bees coming and going. But these bees, they are kind of in the leafcutter family. They're called Megachilidae. Their scopa are on their underside of their abdomen. So you'll see so much pollen on their bellies, and it's really cute. So they don't collect them on their legs, they collect them on their bellies. And so this is, April, so this is the time that you would see them. And sometimes they fly into the wrong tunnel and they'll just turn around, go back out. But they're coming in, bringing in pollen. They can do that all daylight, and they can do that until that whole tunnel is filled. And then what they'll do between those cells is pack those with mud. So mason means mud, and so that's what they're using. And so these are capped by May. And so you see something like that, that may be a mason bee that's going to emerge in the future. And these pupa, when they go through larvae and then pupa, the pupa are actually waterproof. So sometimes, like, you can actually order these, like people who are in orchards, they can order these and they can get them shipped to them because they're really great pollinators of orchards and fruit trees. And that's why they come out so early, because they're evolved to come out when the fruit trees start blooming. But I always have to tell people it is early. It's before you even think that it's ready, it's time for bees. And then, one of my favorites, the leafcutter bee. We have several. We have the alfalfa leafcutter bee, and then we've got a bunch of other ones. But they are just so cute. And you can see in this one on the left, you can see just their abdomen on the other underside is just filled with pollen. And then this is what each one of those, they use leaves for their cells. So each one is like this little tiny capsule of a leaf, just kind of all folded up, and in there is pollen. So each one of those little cells is a leaf cutter bee. And they are, these solitary bees are actually more efficient at pollinating than honeybees. And so it just takes less bees and it takes less time. So, they are really, really great pollinators. And I think we see a lot of, we call it damage to plants, and people want to treat their plants because they don't know that what is eating, which is not eating, it's the leaf cutter bee cutting the little circles in the leaves. And so people worry about that and they think they're damaging the plants and they may want to spray. Then I have to tell them that that's actually leaf cutter bee. So this is a leaf cutter bee cutting out of the circles to make those cells. And these are a bunch of leaf cutter bees coming in and out of the hotel that I had a couple of years ago. And sometimes they go in, if it's their nest, they'll scrape off the pollen off their abdomen, and then they'll leave, but they'll come back also with the little circles of leaves. So you'll see them fly in with a leaf, then fly out, and then back their way in and drop off the pollen, and they do that all day. And here, it does get warm enough that we do have like 2 generations per summer. So usually it's going to be in June, and then again a few weeks later or a month or 2 later, depending on what the temperatures have been. So here, I'm just showing different types of nesting materials. So sometimes, people can use paper straws, they can use drilled wood block, but you can see that some of them are capped with leaves or petals, and they'll just be flying in. It's like entertainment. That's why I don't watch TV, because I'm out watching bees. And then this is just, I don't know, me playing with bees. But these bees are not protecting anything. They are not aggressive. And I mean, all females have a stinger, but doesn't mean they're going to use it. And I've never been stung by a leafcutter bee or any of the solitary bees. If something is going to sting you, it's often because they're pressed up against skin, they feel threatened or squished. But I just hang out with them, and then they fly away and they go, do their thing. But bees get tired. Sometimes you'll see them in the plants. Here's some examples of what the plants will look like. So they use like broad-leaved plants to make those circles in. And so, next time you see that, you'll know that there are leafcutter bees close by. But mine really like the Baptisia leaves. So here's what a cross section looks like of different leafcutter bees at different stages. And so sometimes, you'll see them nesting in very strange places where you might not want them. I think actually this is some type of mason bee, and I don't even know where this was from, but it was like a little hole. I think it went like this. But the bees got in there and started nesting. So, yeah. So you can build it and they might not come, but you can put something else there and they'll nest in it. So this is what I mentioned about having like so many bees. If you've got a really big hotel and you don't clean it or you don't change out the tubes, you can get some parasites. And it's like the circle of life. So the leafcutter bees do have a couple wasps that like to lay eggs in their cells. And we also have a lot of problems with carpet beetles that get in there. Carpet beetles will feed on any natural products, so it's usually like fur, feathers, skin, stuff like that, and like museum specimens. And these are basically the same thing. There's pollen in there, there's dried leaves, and there's like a developing bee, so they will eat all those, and so you don't necessarily want that to happen. But it is very hard to clean those out, so that's why using stems is a good alternative. So I am going to talk about the carpenter bee because it is our native bee. We do have them flying around right now. This is a bee that some people have like a love-hate relationship with, because we know that they're pollinators and they're bees and they're great and they're big, and we like bees, but then they also seem to damage some of the structural wood that we have, especially like pergolas and decks and whatnot. But they can be distinguished from bumblebees because they have hairless abdomens. So I always say they have really shiny butts. So if you can see your reflection in the butt of a big bee, it's probably a carpenter bee. And you'll see them in flowers, and they've got a very distinct shaped face too. They kind of look cute, but they can be kind of destructive. So there's the abdomen comparisons between a bumblebee and a carpenter bee. So the bumblebee is going to have be very furry, and we can also distinguish the difference between a male and female carpenter bee. Behaviorally, the male is going to hover in front of you, and you can call its bluff because males do not have stingers, but it's got this yellow face, and you will see the yellow face because it will stare at you. And he will be very territorial, but he can't really do anything. He's just watching over the nest, and he's making sure that he can try to mate with that female when she comes out of there, because basically she is making making tunnels on her own. She actually can excavate the nest and out of the wood. One of the things people are not so fond of when carpenter bees go from flower to flower is they have a tendency to rob the nectar. So in this video here, this was actually at Scott's house when I got to uh, cat sit or water his plants. Like you can see this bee goes up right into there and clip the petal or the flower and take the nectar out of there. So sometimes they're not great pollinators, and that can be one of those bad bee situations. But so the female, she's going to take her jaws and she's going to excavate that perfectly round half-inch semicircle. And then she goes in the wood and she makes this a 90-degree angle. So even if you were to stick something in there, it turns right away. So what happens though, and people want to know what it looks like, that's what it looks like. I do have I had a friend, neighbor, someone who had a deck, and I was like, if you ever take down that deck, can I have the wood? And like 2 years later, they called and they were like, do you still want the wood? And I was like, yes, I do. So you can see that hole right there, right? So she goes in there and she makes this right angle. So this is what it looks like, right? But this is like over many years. And each one of those, and you can see it later if you want to, like you can see the rough parts of it. So each one of those was a cell. So out of each one of those came out a different carpenter bee. So, and what they use between the cells is wood. So over time, it can be a problem because they tend to come back and bring their family. It's like that, it's that location. It's perfect, and you have your daughters, and then they bring their families, and they have all that there too. Right now is the time we're seeing, we've got a lot of carpenter bees, like dead ones, coming in because at the end of the season, they all go back into the nest and they overwinter. But there is going to be some kind of death over the winter. And then in the spring, they kick out all the dead ones. So you'll see like a circle of dead bees, and people call and they think their bumblebees are being poisoned. And then I have to tell them, you need to look up. There is something nesting in your wood. And then they find out they have carpenter bees. So we also have a small carpenter bee. So it's very, very teeny tiny, and you can hardly even, pay attention to them, but they will be in the stems of some of your plants. So if you have bees nesting in like some of your raspberries or elderberries or something like that, those could be small carpenter bees. They're not destructive, and they're cute, very, very, very small. And then we've got, so this one's a non-native bee. And if you actually look this up, there are a lot of places that are like, have you seen this bee? Because it's non-native. It's from Asia, but it's called the sculptured resin bee. It's a very big bee. And this one is actually displacing or using the nests of carpenter bees. So depending on how you feel about that, I do have a bunch of wood that I have old carpenter bees. So I keep kind of like wood like this under my deck so that the carpenter bees don't feed on my deck. They just keep going in this kind of wood. But I found that the sculptured resin bee has been living in some pieces of my wood. But you can see them pollinating, and what they use is resin in their cells. So you'll see that. This one is a cute bee, kind of a bully, but it's also non-native. You'll see this, they're very widespread. If you've heard of the European wool carder bee, if you've got something like lamb's ear or a plant that has really hairy leaves, those trichomes, what she does is the female, she will scrape those off. That's what carding is. She'll scrape that off, and she'll make it into like kind of like this cotton ball, and that's what she uses between the cells she'll put the pollen in there and then lay an egg. And so if you find little like balls like this, these are actually, there's little pupae in there of developing wool carder bees. So yeah, they do love lamb's ear and common molten, is that what's called? Mullet. Yes, because it's furry as well. So if you see those, sometimes if you disturb them, you'll see those little cotton balls and people will ask what those are. Also, if you're nearby and you can hear the chewing and the crunching. And so sometimes when I'm out there, I accidentally killed my lamb's ear because people said it's going to take over. You got to be careful. So I was so careful that I actually killed my lamb's ear. So I don't know. But they also nest in existing cavities. So some of these these holes may be homes for them. We also have kleptoparasitic bees. Oh wait, going back to why they could be bad, the European wool carder, they are bullies. So if someone calls and they're like, there's a mean bee at my flowers and it's chasing all the other bees away, it's going to be the male European wool carder bee. He's very territorial and he can sometimes fight. So that's the mean bee. We also have kleptoparasitic bees. We also call them brood parasites. So these bees do not have any scopa at all. They do not collect pollen. The cuckoo bird, she lays her egg in a nest of a different bird and then lets that other bird raise her baby bird. It's kind of like that. So these cuckoo bees, they've actually evolved many times in different bee families. So they're very closely related to their host or what actually they rob the pollen from. So she goes in and she'll find a nest of a different bee and lay her eggs, and the larvae will eat the pollen of that other nesting bee. So these are different. Like this is like a cuckoo leafcutter bee. So this one sneaks into leafcutter bee existing tunnels and robs those pollen. So everyone's got a predator. Everyone's got to fight something. But I want to go through just the 6 things that you should do if you want to help and conserve and attract pollinators. So first, you got to get outside and observe, see what's out there, learn about the organisms that are out there, learn about the bees that are out there. And if you plant things, there's going to be bees. And if you are interested, I've got a few books, and there are a lot of different books on how to feed plants to feed the bees. There are books on how to identify some of the bees, but I've known a lot of bee researchers that cannot identify the species unless you kill them and dissect them. And that's not what I want to do. So a lot of times you're not going to get it to species, and don't feel bad. That's what they tell me about it, because that's what some of them do for their lifetime. But there are a lot of specialist bees out there that feed on certain plants, and so you can go and find those. We have a lot of generalist bees that will feed on a lot of different things. But there's squash bees that feed particularly on cucurbits. So very, very cool stuff. You also want to provide food for bees, but you want it to be all season long. So you have to try to plant something early in the spring. Like now, if the mason bees are out now, what kind of things are blooming? What can we do better? Where can we put more blooms? This year, last fall was the first time I planted bulbs, and I kind of went on vacation when they came up. I heard they were beautiful for my neighbor, but I really do want more. And the more things I plant and the more bees and things I see around, the more I want. So you want to make sure, a lot of people have things for summer, but they need things spring, early spring, and then also into the fall. So, there are a lot of different guides and plant lists. So, keep that in mind when you're looking at these plants or looking to buy something, what's going to bloom. And, sometimes the shape of that flower is going to help with bees or butterflies or whatever you're trying to attract, and the colors as well. But we've got a lot of good resources for that. We want to reduce pesticides, and this is a big one. If we're going to plant and we're going to attract pollinators, we want to decrease pesticide use. So again, we want to practice IPM, which doesn't mean that you don't use pesticide. It just means you're using it in a thoughtful way. Maybe if you have to treat something, don't treat it until all the blooms fall off. and sometimes there are going to be pests eating the blooms because that's what they do. They're bugs, and if you plant something there, they're going to feed on it, like caterpillars and whatnot. It's kind of like I tell people, if I put like a plate of cookies in front of those kids on Friday and let them walk by into the classroom and they didn't take or steal a couple of them, that would be weird, right? Like that's what they do. They eat snacks. I eat snacks, right? Like, I mean, our break room has a free table and I have a list on will they eat it. I don't think we've not eaten anything. Like, I don't know who's eating it, but everything is gone. And so if we plant things, we can't say that caterpillars aren't going to eat it because that's what they do. They eat plants. But if we don't use as much pesticides, we're not going to hurt the bees that we're attracting. And also, we're encouraging some of the natural enemies. And as I said, we have so many really cool bugs doing the work for us. Whether it's, the wheel bug that people have learned about. It's one of the only bugs that I've seen eat Japanese beetles. We've got a lot of like fierce larvae of like lacewings and syrphid flies that will eat a lot of aphids. So if we leave things alone sometimes, nature will take care of itself. We've got a lot of parasitoid wasps as well. We often know them by those little cocoons on those hornworms. There are parasitoid wasps for pretty much like for hundreds of insects, thousands. You just never know. But bees can be exposed to pesticides in so many different ways, as you've seen, right? In using those nesting places, the nesting materials, they have to drink water. So we don't want to, have drift or any pesticide in the water that's there, any of those plants. We don't want to contaminate the pollen, the nectar they're feeding on, and the pollen they're feeding to their larvae, right? And all those nesting materials, we want to make sure that that is safe for those bees to develop. So, there are different ways that you can decrease pesticide exposure for bees, and we call all of those things non-targets, whether it's our pets and our kids, grandkids, any of those things, right? Non-targets, the things we're not trying to kill, but we want to make sure we don't expose them to that. So, there are going to be the choices we can make to make more bee-friendly options. There are pesticides that can, get rid of whatever pest you're looking for, but some of them are going to be safer for bees and some of them are going to be more toxic to bees. And so that would be all on the label. And we want to read and follow that because that is where you're going to learn about what that's going to do, how to apply it, how it's going to work best for you. Minimize drift and contamination. Today, I didn't get outside too much, but yesterday was really windy. Not a good day to apply pesticide, right? So those kind of decisions. And again, bees, they feed on blooms. We don't want to treat the blooms, right? Because that's going to expose them. So, those thoughts. We want to provide these healthy habitats. So, if it's those stems, if it's going to be where they're sleeping at night and having their bachelor parties, we want to make sure they're safe. We want to make sure we're not treating those broadleaf plants that they may be cutting with their mouth parts to take back to their nest for their larvae. We have a lot of plant material that's just out in nature that we can use for those existing tunnels. So I've got some, pithy cane, so elderberry, sumac, yucca. Phragmites is a noxious weed, but if you've got those make really good tubes for, if you dry those out, make really good tubes for those leafcutter bees. This is by Heather Home, but it talks about when you are cutting down your plants, if you can leave like 18-inch stems, those would be good enough for bees to come nest in those, because as the new growth grows, it will cover that up. And so you're actually having a habitat for bees and food for bees right there. So, and this is just kind of how it works, and it's easier to deal with, and then it breaks down. You don't have to worry about how you're going to clean some of these nesting blocks. And again, they will nest in basically anything. When you have a population of, like, let's say leafcutter bees, they'll nest anywhere. And so these are some of the weird places I've seen them nest, like in mud dauber nests. When the mud dauber leaves, there's a hole there. Look at that paper wasp nest. That poor leafcutter bee. Like, so they were not long enough. So a lot of those tunnels have to be a certain depth so you get females and males the following year. And all of those actually got parasitized by little wasps because I kept it in a little Tupperware, and all the wasps came out, these little tiny wasps. And then that is a bee. That's the East Campus Union. It's the mortar. There's a hole in the brick. And I was standing there one day, and bees were coming in and out of them. I'm like, that is not a good place. That's not a good place for you. So, if they're around and we're planting, then they will nest in places. But, you got to kind of get them established. But the ground nesting bees also need love and appreciation. So I know a lot of times it's not realistic to leave bare soil, but if there's a little place that you end up seeing bees, maybe leave that little spot there, or plant it. They don't need a lot of space, but I was surprised in the places that I did get to see them. And then, when you learn about something, share your knowledge, share with your friends, share with your grandkids, share with anyone who will listen, your neighbors, your homeowners association, or anything, because it really gets people excited. And so we do have a lot of teaching gardens with our master gardeners at our office. They are fantastic. The gardens are so beautiful, and they love educating. And if we can tour people around, we will. I'm part of a pollinator team, a Nebraska habitat certified habitat, and after someone gets certified by having the plants, they can buy the sign, and people just love having this sign. I don't know if they think that their neighbors ask them about it, or they like to. It's a reason to keep your yard messy, or I don't know what it is, but I have one too, and I love that people will say to me now, "Your garden looks really good," because for a long time I was saying that to everyone else, and so when people are telling me that I have a nice garden, it's like the biggest compliment that I can think of. So that's your call to action. There is something called Pollinator Week near the end of June. So if you have time and you can look at a calendar, you can see what kind of activities are there. I'll be at this pollinator party a couple days before that at Schramm, but bring families out there. The Nebraska Statewide Arboretum sells a couple plants there as well. But there's a lot of like family fun activities out of the Schramm Education Center. We also have, I do have some resources here if you are looking for where I got some of this information. Nebraska Statewide Arboretum has a spring affair this weekend down in Lincoln, and then they're also going to be having a plant sale up at our office on the 7th, so in a couple Saturdays. So there'll be plants there, and it seems like this is a great opportunity to get plants here. It's finally a problem of mine that I just want to buy plants and put them in the ground too. I don't even know a lot about plants, but I'm learning. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. And if you do want to, I don't know why it said that. That was a autocorrect. This is in case you want to tell me something. You can scan that, and there's an evaluation. You can say whatever you want. I usually don't do those things, but work is making me do that. So, but that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. Yeah, so it's the wheel bug, but it's not something you can really like ship in or anything like that, but it's one of those predators that pretty much eats everything. It's a really big predator. Last year, we actually didn't have as many Japanese beetles as we had in the past, so hopefully it continues on that way for our trees and our gardens. Okay, so if you were to put something like this up, so what you want it to face east. Is that right? You want it to have like the sun on it. It needs to be warmed up in the morning so that they can get active. But honestly, if you have bees in your yard, they will nest anywhere. You can have it upside down. You can have it all like this. They need somewhere to nest. But it does take time for them to get there. It took a couple of years for me to have some things out there, and now it's completely filled. Now I have like I need to take them somewhere. Like there are too many bees because I don't don't have enough time to plant all the plants. But yeah, you want it to be off the ground and sheltered, like so you don't want like rain to hit it directly. Some people put like a hardware cloth over it. I have like a cat squirrel that likes to knock things off of my platform that I've got things on there. Um, so you want it to be secured. You don't want it to like wave in the wind. You want it to be secured. Um, and yeah, about 4 to 6 feet off the ground. So.
Mentioned cleaning that. How do you clean it?
Oh, so for these ones, they're cardboard tubes. So you can do replacement cardboard tubes. I used to do like roll parchment paper with like a skewer and put them inside and then pull them out and then reuse the tubes, like put parchment paper, but that was also a lot of work. For the ones like this where you're supposed to, where you've got the drill holes, you're supposed to clean them out with bleach and pipe cleaner or yeah, or replace the wood. That's why I started doing like plant stems where it's gonna break down eventually, and I just put them out, put them in like a pile, my messy part of the yard, and then put new stems in from when I like prune or cut things down. So yeah, I found out the hard way, that it is really hard to maintain them. Oh, okay. There's a question over back here. Yep. It should be it's usually after the first 3 years of being out there. And then you want to make sure that you're doing it on a regular basis when you have a lot of bees. The thing is like when they emerge, they immediately go back in there. Like even if, like I had them in a big like Rubbermaid container with just one hole, and they would all try to get back in there to nest. And so it gets really difficult, and that's why I started doing the stems, because then it's out of my control. You guys can do what you want with the stems. So, but it's, yeah, 3 years and then regularly.
They have the things under the ground and eggs. Then they got eggs. How many nothing? How many are
Yeah, because well, they're insulated under the ground, so like they're safe under there. And even, with the snow, it even makes it warmer. But they are, yeah, it's the safest, warmest place.
they go deep?
No, not necessarily. But it's kind of like, the Japanese beetles, they spend like 10 months of the year underground. And so just when it's really cold, they just go deeper and then they come up and feed on the roots. So with the bees, like she just knows where to put them where they're safe. So yeah, whole different life under our feet. Anyone else, or you guys want to?
So thank you guys all for coming. Thank you, Jody, for doing this all. I know you guys gave her a round of applause, but she's literally an expert in this field. I come up here and I talk about birds and stuff all the time. I'm not an expert, but I am just very happy to have a bona fide expert here who knew what she was talking about. So that is awesome. And I was just thinking so much. I would like to find out where I can buy some of those bee houses to sell, because I think the ones that I have access to are just kind of like decorative for the yard, but I've heard that they're not necessarily functional.
So That's that's a really good point. So the ones that we do find in the yard or find in a lot of stores, they're not deep enough, and they aren't necessarily like attached at the back. They should have an ending point, and they should be able to be cleaned, right? So to take those out. This there is a neb guide, so it's the second to last one. And if you look up UNL Solitary Bee Hotel, there's a whole neb guide on how to do it, what size, like it'll tell you what diameter it needs to be for each bee. So, those bigger bees need a bigger diameter hole, and then the bigger the diameter, then the longer it needs to be. And that's just like, it needs to be a certain depth. And that's why we've got like these things like this, because it usually can have, six to eight to nine different cells in there. So, per tube. So that's good. I think these were actually made by maybe Boy Scouts or something. They had a project. So
Maybe we need to do a workshop.
yeah, that would be good.
I love learning new things, so thank you so much for coming. We want to thank you guys for coming out again. I see a lot of familiar faces and I see some new faces, so thank you for coming. If this is your second, third, fourth time, or if it's your first time, we really appreciate it. We'd like to just try to give you guys some kind of a discount for coming out here. We do not have a ton when it comes to the visa. This is why we wanted to have you out so that we could learn and grow. But tonight we wanted to at least give you guys something to buy for a discount if you would like to. So we're going to do 20% off the following items. We do have Prairie Light seed mixes and rice hulls that Janelle talked to you about earlier. That we're going to be doing 20% off those, off rain gauges, any of our trellises, benches, yard decor, which is spinners, decorations, etc. Anything you put in your yard to make it look better. Flags, flagpoles, windsocks, rugs, chimes, and we have some geocharged fertilizer. So you're welcome to shop around. You're welcome to stay and ask questions. I don't know how many questions I can answer about bees. We're gonna have them off your jelly. If you know where.
But you should tell them that.
Well,
I get that.
I was asking tricks, but bees, wasps. I'm not even exactly sure what it is, but they look like sweat bees almost that are swarming the jelly when I feed my Oreos, and they will clean out a cup of jelly in a day easily. So I started putting out applesauce in a bowl about 5 to 10 feet away from my Oreo feeder, and the bees love going to it. So it kind of distracts them from the jelly.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents there.
That's
So,
IPM.
yes. So thank you guys all for having fun settled down. If there's that better, let us know that because we're always a work in progress. There's still some get the planet but shining in that. Which are that's gonna be a lot more expensive. We're gonna have to start charging for admission on this building. Which is good. Thanks for coming.